Hi, it's Katrina. There are so many things they don't teach you in school. Don't worry, that's what I'm here for. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and get ready for some historical mysteries. And let me know if you want to see more videos like this because there's a lot where this came from.
The truth of Easter Island.
The heads of Easter Island have been capturing our attention for centuries. Did you know that each head is attached to a body? They aren't just heads, they are actually entire figures of enormous proportions. Nobody knew the Easter Island heads weren't just heads a few years ago. This was a big revelation when researchers figured it out. Underneath each head is a body buried under heaps of dirt.
The discovery led to even more unanswerable questions about one of the world's most mysterious island civilizations. The indigenous people of Easter Island are known as the Rapa Nui. They call the giant heads Moai. Yet even the Rapa Nui had forgotten that their ancestors carved Moai with bodies and then buried them up to their necks. Today, nobody has any idea why. What was the point of any of it? Scientists from UCLA spent 9 years excavating Moai across Easter Island. It was part of a massive project, with the team documenting and studying nearly 1,000 statues. At the end of the project, the team published their results, a decade's worth of accumulated knowledge. Here's what they had to say. The scientists blamed the burial of the statues on natural geological processes. They claimed the lower part of the statues were buried by natural landslides. Doesn't that seem a little suspicious to you? Landslides across the whole island buried thousands of statues up to the exact same spot on their neck? That's a pretty organized series of landslides. The team also said they learned how the statues were made. The Rapa Nui carved the statues from massive volcanic tuffs. This does make sense because Easter Island was formed by volcanic flows. It's very similar to Hawaii in that regard. There was plenty of stone to build statues on the island. On the backs of the statues, the team uncovered petroglyphs. They don't know what the petroglyphs say, but think they could have something to do with individual families, like a family signature. It could be that each family built their own Moai statue. The team also learned how the statues were transported and lifted upright. Each statue was put on logs and rolled to its location. Then it was carved while lying on the ground. After it was carved, a pit was dug in front of it. Using the pit, some tree trunks, and a lot of rope, the Moai was lifted upright. It was basically a primitive system of pulleys.
Here's something else that might shock you.
Not only do the Easter Island heads have bodies, but they also used to have hats. Each Moai sported a fashionable red stone hat. But since they've been standing for more than 500 years, some for as long as 900 years, their hats have almost all fallen off. The hats were made from red volcanic pumice.
They may not have been hats at all, but may have represented a topknot, a type of a hairstyle that would have been worn by chieftains. Between 1200 and 1300, there was a surge of new statues on the island, each larger than before, weighing several tons. The mystery continues as researchers try to solve how the island's giant stone statues were moved and what they actually mean.
The Maya and the antediluvian world.
Despite Mexico and Guatemala being overrun with Maya ruins, scientists know very little about them. What you're about to learn of the ancient Mayan civilization and their connection to the antediluvian world might just shock you.
The first thing you need to know is that most of the current understanding of Maya history comes from the Spanish and a handful of books. During the Spanish conquest of Mexico, they destroyed most of the Maya codices they came across, books that contained the full history of their people. Who knows how much information was lost? Only a few of the codices survive today. This has given researchers a glimpse into their culture, but only a glimpse. It's as if aliens came down from space, and the only book left on Earth for them to gain a full understanding of human history was the Bible. The aliens would understand a little, but hardly the big picture. Spanish conquistadors not only burned the Maya histories, they also destroyed their buildings. Sure, you can see the ruins of Tikal in Guatemala, or you can visit the pyramids of Chichen Itza in Mexico. But the majority of Maya structures were demolished, every last stone, by the Spanish. The Maya were around way before the Aztec. The largest pyramid complex in Guatemala at El Mirador dates to 2700 BC. That means the Maya were building pyramids before the Egyptians built the Giza pyramids in 2589 BC.
I hope you're getting excited because I'm about to reach the big selling point here.
At sites like El Mirador, home of La Dante Pyramid Complex, archaeologists have found little evidence of activity prior to the Maya. Other sites like Copan and Chichen Itza are similar. Each time the Maya arrived in a place, they built a city from scratch with incredible engineering powers and scientific understanding. It was like they already knew what they were doing. In Europe, the Near East, and many other places, archaeologists can typically find ruins going back to the Stone Age underneath modern sites. There are archaeological layers showing the evolution of a specific society.
When it comes to the Maya, it's as if they came out of nowhere, already equipped with the knowledge necessary to start civilization. I know you might be wondering about the Olmec. They are believed by many scientists to be the mother culture of the Maya.
One man who disagrees with that is Dr. Richard Hansen, director of El Mirador Basin Project. Richard has been studying the Maya for almost his entire adult life. He said the Olmec is not the origin of the Maya, but merely their contemporaries. Richard thinks the Maya destroyed the Olmec through a systematic military campaign, winning Mesoamerica through violence similar to how the Romans won the Mediterranean.
Everything scientists are saying about the Maya could be wrong, especially when you take into account the evidence of flooding. I'll come back to this in a bit and tell you about the Maya and their connection to the biblical flood. And now for a quick break because it's shoutout time! I want to give a huge thank you to Megan Kaza for the generous super thanks. It really helps a lot. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family.
Hercules and the Hydra.
A stone seal was recently found in the highlands of northern Israel. It's 2,800 years old, depicting an image of Hercules battling the legendary Hydra. Experts believe the stone seal could be the missing link between Greek mythology and biblical legend.
This is an amazing piece of history, found during an archaeological excavation at Tel Hazor in 2022. It depicts a battle between a man wielding a spear and a seven-headed serpent. The man is most likely Hercules, with the seven-headed snake being the Hydra. It was handcrafted by someone, maybe an Israelite or maybe a Phoenician, around the year 800 BC. This was right around the same time the Hebrew Bible was being written. Believe it or not, the image of a warrior fighting a snake is even older, first appearing in Mesopotamia about 4,500 years ago. Since the dawn of civilization, Hercules has been around in one form or another, under different names, and he has always battled a serpent. Scholars think Hercules is one of the oldest characters in the world. The myth of man versus serpent began in Mesopotamia, continued in ancient Greece, then was adapted by Christians for the Book of Revelation. You know, the story of humanity versus the serpent in the Garden of Eden?
This ancient stone tablet is physical proof of that transition. In other words, it's proof of biblical authors taking some inspiration from older myths and legends.
The Great Sheep Panic.
The Great Sheep Panic of 1888 is one of those bizarre mysteries they are never going to teach in school. It's so weird and obscure that I'm not even sure I should be telling you about it. But here we are, and here we go.
It happened on November 3rd at around 8 p.m. in England. Tens of thousands of sheep across about 200 square miles of Oxfordshire went bananas. Bananas with a capital B. Farmers couldn't keep their sheep in their pens. They broke through fences, rampaged across the countryside, going positively nuts. It's not that unusual for a group of sheep to panic, but this was crazy. It wasn't just a flock, it was every farmer's flock over an impossibly huge area. When all was said and done, farmers found their sheep stuck in hedges, disoriented on back roads, and huddled together in sheer terror. Something must have happened to spook the sheep. Normally, these types of incidents can be attributed to dogs or predators, but not this time. The incident was too widespread over too large of an area. Things get even spookier when you learn that 5 years later, there was another sheep panic in the same area at the same time. The second panic caused a human panic. Scientists were so concerned that they published a study on it in the Journal of the Royal Agricultural Society.
19th century scientists blamed the panic on heavy darkness. Keep in mind, these were the same scientists who prescribed bleach therapy and sent emotional women to the loony bin for being hysterical. You can take their diagnosis with a huge grain of salt. To this day, the Great Sheep Panic remains unsolved. What did all those sheep see that dark November night that made them go completely insane? Any thoughts? Let me know in the comments below.
The secret floods of the Maya.
A recent geological study on the surface of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula has shown evidence of ancient tsunamis. There was a tsunami 1,500 years ago that passed inland. Its destructive force incalculable. Waves up to 50 feet tall struck down everything in their path, toppling buildings and drowning entire villages.
It's a grim scenario, but it's true. Archaeologists have pointed to evidence in Maya ruins like Coba, Uxmal, and other small cities. At Sayil, on the Gulf coast of the peninsula, there is evidence that the main palace complex was hammered by a tsunami, leaving stones pushed down and scattered. Some experts even think the Maya knew about the risk of floods and, before their civilization collapsed, started preparing for them. American forensic engineer Jim O'Con has spent more than 40 years trying to understand the genius of Maya engineering, specifically the seemingly indestructible nature of their versatile cement. Their roads, ceilings, and foundations were designed as if to defend against tidal floods. What if the Maya were aware of a flood in their distant past that destroyed their civilization? It's possible the Maya designed flood-resistant buildings as part of a shared memory of an earlier disaster. All up and down the west coast of the United States, there was massive flooding between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago. This was first brought up by geologist Harkin Bretz more than 100 years ago. Many scientists are convinced flooding swept across the U.S., even carving valleys in Washington state and northern Oregon. This American flood happened at the same time that the Bible says God sent a flood to destroy civilization. The evidence isn't just in North America. There is evidence of a great flood in nearly every part of the world. If the flood water was enough to carve deep valleys out of Oregon, surely it was enough to erase entire civilizations. Did you know the Maya have a flood myth? It's true. And so do the Zuni and the Lakota. Native Americans tell stories of a flood that changed the face of the world more than 10,000 years ago. Did you also know the Maya used to have a system of highways? At least it's assumed the Maya built the roads. These thoroughfares are known as Saxpes. These thoroughfares were only discovered recently thanks to satellite images. Each one of these ancient roads is between 10 and 25 feet wide, pure white and still solid. Nobody knows quite how old the roads are, only that they must be seriously ancient. Yet they were made so tough that they will likely outlive every paved road in modern America. Take a look at these roads, image taken straight from Google Earth. Those are not modern roads. They aren't logging roads. Those are roads that go back thousands of years and lead to nowhere. Whatever cities these roads once connected are now obliterated. Not a single trace of them left. Now take a look at this satellite image by Angela Mickle. It shows a road 30 feet underwater. Why in the world did someone build a highway underwater off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico? There is only one logical answer. These roads belong to a mighty civilization that dominated Mexico at a time before the flood 12,000 years ago. Their cities were destroyed by the flood, but their roads still survive. Many of the roads are underwater because the sea level rose so much. This could explain why the Maya came out of nowhere already in possession of incredible engineering knowledge 5,000 years ago. Maybe they had originally belonged to this pre-flood civilization. After the flood, it took them a few thousand years to jumpstart human civilization again. It could be why the Maya and the Egyptians started building pyramids at the same time. They both had to recover from the destruction of the flood. Worshipping dinosaur eggs. Things change, interpretations evolve, and new things are learned. Sometimes this can be embarrassing. Like in this small Indian village where locals had been worshipping some rocks as divine manifestations, only to find out their divine rocks are really dinosaur eggs. I mean, still cool, but probably not what they were expecting. This story is every bit as weird as it sounds. In the small village located in Madhya Pradesh, locals revered a collection of small rocks they call Kakad Bahirav. The rocks are small enough to fit in your palm. Locals believe them to be sacred entities bestowed upon them by an ancient deity. Keeping the rocks safe ensured that the village would have luck when it came to crops and livestock. These rocks were so important to the villagers that every day they gave offerings to them, especially coconuts. For some reason, the Kakad Bahirav really appreciated coconut offerings. There is no precise timeline for how long this went on. Local lore seems to suggest that people had been worshipping the stones for generations. It's safe to say the tradition has been going strong for at least 200 years, though likely even longer. It would still be going on right now if not for a group of scientists who decided to investigate the stones. Researchers from the Birbal Sahni Institute of Paleobotany identified the rocks as being dinosaur eggs, roughly 70 million years old. Maybe the people who started worshipping them thought they were the original dragon eggs. However, they don't know what kind of dinosaur eggs they are, so that's a bit of a letdown. The whole situation has grown really tense. These eggs were sacred objects for centuries to the villagers. Then a group of scientists showed up and spoiled everything. Project Silverbug. The United States Air Force has a dubious history when it comes to flying saucers. During the Cold War, they even tried to build one. Then they kept it a secret for decades. The only reason I can tell you about Project Silverbug today is because enough time has passed that the documents had to be declassified. The Roswell incident was in 1947. That was when the world started waking up to the phenomenon of the unidentified flying object. But what if every alien sighting, every eyewitness account of a disc in the sky can be traced back to the military? 6 years after the Roswell incident, in 1953, the US military officially began Project Silverbug in partnership with Avro Aircraft Limited, a company out of Ontario, Canada. The aviation company was hired by the US to build a saucer-shaped aircraft that could take off vertically and reach unprecedented speeds. This didn't come out of the blue. The US military had already been secretly testing and flying disc-shaped vehicles throughout the 40s and 50s. It's been estimated the US had up to 35 projects on the go at a single time, researching how to properly achieve vertical liftoff and descent. Even earlier, the Germans had been trying to do the same thing. During World War II, Germany was trying to figure out how they could keep air superiority over the Allies. It was only near the end of the war that Germany supposedly had saucer-like airships designed, but the Nazis were defeated before they could ever properly test them. When the war was over, the American government did a lot of scientific recruiting. The best German scientists were secretly whisked away to America as part of Operation Paperclip. That's another top-secret project that we only know about today because of declassified information. Among the recruited Nazi scientists were men who worked on the German flying saucer, like Dr. Richard Mehta. They were incorporated into Project Silverbug and sent to Canada to work with Avro Aircraft Limited. So how fast do you think a flying saucer can go? The United States of America wanted their flying saucers to go 2,300 miles per hour at an altitude of 80,000 feet. That's not a lot by modern standards. NASA's X-43 can go more than 7,000 miles per hour, but in the 1950s, it was a big deal. This is a public domain image of the US Air Force's Avro car from the 1950s, their real flying saucer. This vehicle was 100% legit. The Toronto Star even leaked its development in 1953. So, what happened to the Avro car? They couldn't get it off the ground. Scientists could only get the aircraft to rise vertically about 5 feet before it became unstable and crashed. After spending millions of dollars, Project Silverbug was discontinued in 1961. Subsequently, the Canadian aviation company responsible for building it went out of business. These days, you can see the Avro car for yourself at the Army Transportation Museum in Virginia, where it is on display right now. The Forgotten Fortresses of Alexander the Great. An amazing discovery was made in Uzbekistan that once more proved the genius of Alexander the Great. This little piece of the Macedonian conqueror's history is not well known. In the year 329 BC, Alexander was in the midst of conquering Persia. He took the ancient capital of Bactria, marched to Sogod, conquered it, and kept going with his campaign. 1 year later, he was forced to turn around and go back to Sogod and Bactria because there had been rebellions. Alexander suppressed the rebellions and sat down to think of how he could protect his realm from another uprising. The answer came in the form of 6 fortresses. According to ancient sources, Alexander personally selected 6 spots on high ground where the fortresses were to be built. The fortresses gave Alexander's men a way of securing his rear. Not his personal rear, but the rear of his conquered lands. The outposts allowed Alexander to continue his conquest without having to worry about going backward to quell another rebellion. Nobody knew where any of these fortresses were until 2003, when the ruins of one was discovered in southern Uzbekistan. High on a ridge above the Hisar Mountains, 3,000 feet above sea level, archaeologists found a huge ruin. This fortress was massive, yet it was hidden amidst mountains that look as if they've never seen human life. This place is desolate, empty, and downright hostile. Take a look at this artist's recreation of the fortress named Kurganzol. It was essentially a castle, and there were 6 of them here to protect the old Bactrian lands from Alexander's enemy. The fortress goes to show that there was so much more involved in conquering the world than just having a big army. Alexander left behind fortress barricades as he marched across the globe. The Hisar mountain fortresses were abandoned in the 3rd century BC, when the region was successfully subjugated by the Greeks. The Mausoleum of the Yellow Emperor. There's a monumental mausoleum in China that belongs to an immortal emperor who rose to heaven. It's the Chinese equivalent of Jesus Christ's tomb in Jerusalem, only older, bigger, and more mysterious. This is the Mausoleum of the Yellow Emperor, sitting in the center of a scenic area more than 300 hectares large. China takes care of this sacred place with the utmost respect. The mausoleum is surrounded by over 60,000 cypress trees, some of which are more than 1,000 years old. The mausoleum is right in the middle of one of the oldest cypress forests in the world. But enough about trees, let's get down to the myth. Who is the Yellow Emperor, and is this really his tomb? You may have heard me mention the Yellow Emperor before, but I've never gone this in-depth about his mysterious mausoleum. Legend has it the emperor ruled China starting around 2700 BC. That was the same time the Maya started building their cities in Guatemala, just to give you an idea of how far back this legend goes. Maybe he was a man, maybe he was a god. The emperor was considered a real historical figure, the first king of China, until scientists started doubting his authenticity in the 1920s. Now, many historians think he started as a supreme god named Shangdi, and was later given the mantle of emperor. Either way, his legend is the same. After ruling China for more than a century, the Yellow Emperor ascended to heaven, leaving behind his clothes to be buried in his mausoleum. This is a picture of the Yellow Emperor's temple within his mausoleum complex. Pretty impressive for a guy who might not have existed 4,700 years ago, don't you think? It's called the Xuanyuan Temple, and it is the biggest of its kind in China. The actual mausoleum is at least 2,600 years old, though nobody knows its true age. The structure has been renovated so many times, all truth of it is lost. Nobody even knows what's buried inside the tomb because China refuses to excavate it. It's entirely plausible that this huge mausoleum is dedicated to a myth. The amazing discovery of Abu Simbel. In 1813, Swiss explorer Burckhardt was led to a secret place in southern Egypt by a young boy named Abu Simbel. When they arrived, there wasn't much to see. They were standing on a bunch of sand dunes, yet the young boy insisted there was a treasure underneath the sand. Burckhardt couldn't find anything, so he left. It was a huge disappointment. A few years later, in 1817, Giovanni Belzoni returned to the mysterious sand dune and started digging. It turned out the young boy had been right. There was a treasure here. Giovanni soon discovered a pair of majestic temples built for King Ramses II and his main wife, Queen Nefertari. The temples were 100% buried in sand, completely invisible until excavators freed them from their sandy prison. I can't even express how much sand it took to drown the two temples. The bigger one stands 100 feet tall. Enough sand was removed to fill a small lake. After a lot of excavating, the two temples were revealed for the first time since they had been forsaken to the desert around 3,000 years ago. The biggest is the Great Temple, dedicated to the gods Ra Harakti and Ta, but also to Ramses II. The pharaoh deified himself with the construction of this temple, leaving 4 colossal statues of himself outside the entrance. The other one is called the Small Temple. It's a lot smaller, as its name suggests, standing only 40 feet tall. It's adorned by several colossi, including 4 statues of Ramses and 2 of Nefertari. It was dedicated to his main queen and to the goddess Hathor. These are still 2 of the most fantastic temples anywhere in Egypt. Seeing them today, it's hard to imagine them being completely lost to a sea of sand. Yet what was their purpose when they were built in the 13th century BC? They were to celebrate a great victory. Ramses had just won his war against the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BC. He'd also conquered the lands of Nubia, building 2 majestic temples right at the edge of Nubia, and after such a great military victory, was a testament to Egypt's unstoppable might. Sadly, though, Egypt's might was indeed stoppable. The temples were abandoned some years later and completely forgotten. Even after being rediscovered and freed from their sandy graves, the temples were threatened by the construction of the Aswan High Dam. In the 1960s, UNESCO and a team of international scientists spent more than $40 million to dismantle and rebuild the temples 690 feet away. And thank goodness they did, because otherwise they may have never been found, or they would be deep underwater. The lost gravesite of Plato. A bionic eyeball might just be pointing to the long-lost grave of ancient Greece's favorite philosopher, our good friend Plato. It might be hiding in plain sight. Before I talk about the bionic eyeball, I need to take you back in time to the year 79 AD. That was the year Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying the city of Pompeii in volcanic debris, layers of pumice and ash. When this happened, the people of Pompeii and their houses were incinerated. The same thing happened in Herculaneum, just a few miles away. One of the places burned to a crisp in Herculaneum was a man's personal library, known as the Villa of the Papyri. The villa was found in 1792, quite a while ago. It contains 1,800 scrolls, none of them able to be read. The treasure trove of ancient texts has been impossible to read all of these years because they were carbonized by the intense heat of the volcanic eruption. They look like blackened bits of charcoal at the bottom of the barbecue. How in the world are you supposed to read something like that? This is where the bionic eyeball comes in. A group of scientists working with the Vesuvius Challenge project used infrared hyperspectral imaging to translate 2,000 characters of a scroll that looks like it was pulled from a fireplace. This amazing computer vision programming, mixed with something called optical coherence tomography, allowed researchers to look through the carbonized material. It's not a real bionic eyeball, but pretty close. As if this weren't amazing enough, the text of the scroll dropped an atomic-level bombshell. After translating the text, scientists found a clue suggesting Plato was buried in a garden near a shrine to the Muses in the city of Athens. The text even offers some details of the philosopher's last night alive before he died of an illness. The scroll says that before Plato died, as he suffered from a high fever, a musician tried to comfort him. Rather than be comforted, Plato criticized the musician for his lack of rhythm. The scroll even mentions Plato being sold into slavery around 399 BC, a part of the philosopher's life you definitely don't learn in school. This discovery is huge. All of this information was learned thanks to an optical computer program and a random few pages in a scorched book. Just a few pages from one book in a library that has 1,800. Imagine the kinds of secrets that can be revealed if this technology takes off in a big way. Researchers say they are hoping to use the program in 2026 to read even more books burned by Mount Vesuvius. As for Plato's tomb, now archaeologists know where it is. It's in a secret garden near the Academy in Athens. But will they find it? If they do, you'll definitely be hearing about it from me. There is no Machu Picchu. You have been calling Machu Picchu the wrong name. I've been calling it the wrong name. It turns out that everybody has gotten the name wrong. Researchers recently discovered the ancient city of the Inca is actually called Huayna Picchu. But do you think the real name will catch on? Peruvian historian Donato Amado Gonzalez has done the legwork on this one. He looked through many historical sources to find the truth behind the name of the town. Donato said that when American explorer Hiram Bingham climbed to the top of the citadel in 1911 and asked what it was called, he was told Huayna Picchu. But a few days later, somebody else told him it was called Machu Picchu. Not knowing which was correct, he went with the latter. How did Donato figure this out when everyone else had missed it? He claims to have poured through conquistador documents, original maps of the region, old land records, and Hiram's personal notes. For example, Donato found an official Spanish record from 1539, made less than a decade after the Spanish conquered Peru. It refers to an area simply as Picchu. There's another record from 1568 mentioning a town also called Picchu. A third record from 1588 documents an issue with the inhabitants of Vilcabamba. They wished to return to the town of Huayna Picchu, where they might revive their own religion. They wanted to get away from the Spanish, back to the holy city where they could pursue their traditional beliefs. This was not something the Spanish allowed. Donato also came across an atlas published in 1904, showing the ruins of a small town called Huayna Picchu. And these are only a few examples. There are way more. Donato said there is no debate about it. Not only was Machu Picchu never really lost, it's not really called Machu Picchu. Thanks for watching! How many famous ancient places do you think we've gotten totally wrong? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to see more like this, be sure to stick around for an older video that you might have missed.
Civil War gold. In 2018, an agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation applied for a federal warrant. The warrant was to seize a legendary trove of government gold that was supposedly stolen over a century ago during the Civil War. Treasure hunters believe the FBI made off with the gold and hid it in a cave in Pennsylvania, then covered the whole thing up. As weird as all this sounds, it's true. According to the Associated Press and the Philadelphia Inquirer, a federal judge unsealed the case documents to show that the FBI had indeed gone in search of the legendary lost gold. The FBI believed there was a significant cache of gold, more than 1 or 2 tons, secretly hidden underground in this alleged cave. The reason the FBI had needed a warrant was because they were worried that the federal government would excavate the site before them, then steal the gold for themselves. It was a bureaucratic mess, and one that was apparently fruitless. Nobody ever found the gold, which for the record was allegedly stolen on its way to the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia in 1863. Historians believe it was a secret society of Confederate sympathizers called the Knights of the Golden Circle who pulled off the heist. But in the end, we don't actually know if the U.S. Mint was in fact robbed, if the gold was ever stashed in a cave, or if the FBI found it and then lied about it to keep it all for themselves. Lake Guatavita. Lake Guatavita in Colombia is one of the most mysterious places in the whole country. According to the Spanish chronicler Francisco López, the conquistadors first heard of the lake while in Panama. They heard of a strange location in the mountains that was so rich in gold that men would get bored of it. This turned out to be Lake Guatavita, high up in the plains surrounding what is now the city of Bogotá. At the time, in 1537, the area was occupied by the Muisca people. Their leader was Panquiaco, or the Golden One, which translated to Spanish as El Dorado. The lake was the holiest site for these indigenous inhabitants, and they believed it was filled with gods. To satisfy these gods, they would throw all of their most precious gold trinkets into the water. And so, 1537 was the beginning of a gold rush that would go on for 375 years. Because the Muisca had been tossing gold and treasure into the lake for generation after generation, the Spanish knew the bottom must be covered in treasure. There was an attempt made in 1652 by Antonio Sepulveda to dig a discharge canal to completely drain the lake, But it didn't work. English adventurers came and also tried to dive to the bottom, as did the Germans. And then in 1912, the government tried to drain the lake using new technology. But as far as we know, the treasure is still down there, and nobody has been able to find it. Although there are still some conspiracies that say the government did find it and simply kept it all for themselves back in the early 20th century. The most ancient crown. Back in 1961, an Israeli archaeologist named Pesa Bar Adon accidentally found a massive hoard of ancient relics. Among these relics was what researchers say is the oldest crown in the entire world. It happened while Bar Adon was rappelling down a sheer cliff in the Nahal Mishmar region of the Dead Sea. He came across a cave that was like something out of Aladdin, an actual cave of wonders. Inside the dark confines of the cavern were over 400 prized artifacts made from ivory, copper, and bronze. These fantastic treasures dated back to the Copper Age, or around 3,500 BC, but possibly even earlier. But by far the most spectacular treasure of all was the crown, dated at 6,000 years old. It doesn't look like your typical crown, and it certainly wasn't studded with an assortment of diamonds and jewels. It's merely a circular piece of copper with what appear to be vultures decorating it, and some horn-like protrusions along the top. It definitely would have been imposing 6,000 years ago, but it doesn't look like much now. There was even a matching bronze scepter with similar antler-like protrusions. In the end, the treasure hoard still remains a mystery. Nobody knows why anyone would stick so many priceless goods into a cavern, or who wore this fabulous crown. Mosby's treasure. There is said to be a treasure of immense value hidden in the forest of Fairfax County, Virginia. The treasure was worth $350,000 when it was buried in the 1800s. Today, it would be worth over $6 million. It all started with John Mosby, a Confederate partisan ranger, also known as the Gray Ghost for his lightning-fast raids and his ability to elude pursuers from the Union Army. It was in 1863 that Mosby took command over the 43rd Battalion Virginia Cavalry. These men were trained in guerrilla warfare. They didn't fight on the front lines, but instead snuck into camps at night to take prisoners and steal spoils. One of these raids was conducted on March 9, 1863. Mosby and his group of men raided the Fairfax County Courthouse in the middle of the night. And that was where they found $350,000 in gold and jewelry, a collection of countless heirlooms that had been taken by Union troops from homes in the South. Mosby and his team of rangers quietly left Fairfax, but on their way back to friendly territory, they came across a large detachment of enemy soldiers. To keep the treasure safe, Mosby and his most trusted sergeant left their detachment and buried the treasure under a tree. But that treasure was never seen again. At least not officially. Some say the sergeant double-crossed Mosby and went back to steal the gold, while others say Union soldiers found the hiding place. Some even say it's still buried there, but no one knows for sure. Big shout out to Says Who and Leon Welch. Thanks so much for watching and spending time with us. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Victorio Peak Treasure. There is a great towering mountain in New Mexico called Victorio Peak, not far from the city of Hot Springs. It's here where one of the most famous treasures in the United States is supposedly hidden. Back in November of 1937, Milton Doc Noss, a local deer hunter, went in search of fresh water. That was when he found the entrance to a mysteriously hidden tunnel near the mountain's peak. Even stranger was that he found an old ladder that someone had placed there before, and it led deep into a cavern in the mountain. Deep inside, he found a chest filled with silver coins. But that wasn't all. There were passageways leading to other caverns, and almost every cave had chests full of gold and jewels. It was just too incredible to believe. Gold and diamonds and jewels weren't the only things Milton found inside those passages. He also came across dozens of human skeletons. He never learned who had been in the mountain before him, but soon after the discovery, he established legal ownership over the land and secured mining rights. He ended up extracting at least 200 gold bars from the cave, although there are said to be over 16,000 total. But then Milton started to go a little insane. He allegedly hid the gold bars all over the New Mexico desert. Then, in 1939, he accidentally caused a collapse inside the mountain using dynamite, sealing himself out of his own mine. Milton was murdered in 1949, and over the next 3 years, friends and family tried desperately to find the gold he'd stashed in the desert to no avail. In 1952, the United States Army took ownership of the collapsed mine and forced the Noss family off their own land. It's believed to this very day that the Army found out about the gold, moved in to steal it, and illegally pillaged that family's property. Island of Gold. In the Musi River of Indonesia, local divers recently discovered a small collection of artifacts. They came across gold rings in the muck of the riverbed, as well as precious beads and other unbelievable artifacts. The entire riverbed was found to be practically covered in jewels, and these jewels are old. By old, I'm talking over 1,300 years ago, from the 7th century AD. Researchers believe the artifacts at the bottom of the river likely belong to the Srivijaya Empire, and that they may have come from a mysterious, lost island of gold. According to British maritime archaeologist Sean Kingsley, divers have been finding bits and pieces of the city for the last 5 years. Coins from different periods, statues of the Buddha, gems, and lots of treasure. Precious metals, temple bells, wine jugs, brilliantly made flutes shaped like peacocks, and so much more. All of this stuff would have likely been in the city of Palembang, located on the island of Sumatra and situated on the Musi River. Historical records from 7th century China say that there were over 1,000 Buddhist monks living here, and that it was a popular pilgrimage site for people on their way to India. However, war in 1025 with the Chola dynasty of India reduced this once powerful nation to dust, and the city of Palembang decayed and was swallowed by the river. Now it looks like the priceless treasure that once made this city rich is bubbling back to the surface. Although, unfortunately, no official archaeological excavations have been conducted, and as of right now, this site is a free-for-all. Unconfirmed reports claim that fishermen and greedy treasure thieves descend on the river at night and are making away with these small fortunes in gems and artifacts. Nazi gold in Lake Toplitz. In the Dead Mountains of Austria, about 40 miles from the city of Salzburg, lies Lake Toplitz. It's inaccessible for roughly 5 months of the year because of the freezing conditions. And according to some, the bottom of the lake is littered with Nazi gold. Depending on who you ask, there is some kind of underwater dragon guarding the gold, since many who go searching for it end up dead. We know that in 1944, the German Navy established a testing station on the shores of the lake, testing things like torpedoes and weapons. In 1945, the locals began trying to cash British banknotes. It was crazy because these people had no real access to British currency, yet everyone and their dog was suddenly loaded with British cash. An investigation revealed that they had gotten the money from the banks of the lake, where it was washing up like soggy leaves. This led to some speculation over what else might be hiding in the lake. Clearly, the Nazis had dumped some kind of treasure into the water. It was later assumed that the Nazis had dumped a huge gold reserve from the Reichsbank as well. Not just banknotes, but solid gold and platinum, famous works of art, and jewelry. Many covert missions to discover the treasure came and went over the years. A team of Navy divers tried it in 1947, but one of them drowned. And since then, as far as we know, there hasn't been any gold found. The treasure of Robinson Crusoe Island. Robinson Crusoe Island is a remote piece of land in Chile protected by UNESCO as a special biosphere reserve. This is really hampering a Dutch millionaire's plans for digging up a massive treasure worth roughly $10 billion. His name is Bernard Kaiser, a Dutch-American who has been searching for treasure on Robinson Crusoe Island since 1998. The island was named when the Scottish explorer Alexander Selkirk became marooned in the 18th century. His story later inspiring the famous novel Robinson Crusoe. But the legend of the island goes back even further to 1715, when English pirate Cornelius Webb supposedly buried a stolen treasure from Peru on the island. An estimated 800 barrels of gold ingots, gems, silver, and more. And it's all sitting on the island, waiting to be discovered. At least this is the legend. Bernard Kaiser has been looking for the treasure for 20 years. And up until now, he's been prohibited from using heavy machinery. This means that he could only use shovels and brushes to look for the gold. But now, the Chilean government gave him permission to use heavy diggers to rip the island apart to find the treasure once and for all. Many Chileans believe the government has done this because they have made a shady backroom deal to take half the money for themselves. The Oak Island Mystery. The Oak Island Mystery is either one of the biggest unsolved mysteries ever, an elaborate hoax, or a really weird coincidence. Oak Island is in the Canadian province of Nova Scotia, and ever since the 18th century, people have been trying to find treasure on the island. Some say pirates buried treasure there, some say the Holy Grail is hidden on the island, and others say the Ark of the Covenant is there, brought across the world by the Knights Templar nearly 1,000 years ago. The biggest discovery was a mysterious stone inscribed with an illegible cipher in a nonsense language at the end of the 18th century. It was translated in 1865 to say 40 feet below 2 million pounds are buried. And ever since, people have been digging in the exact same spot trying to get to the promised gold at the bottom. It's called the Money Pit, and it's an absolute nightmare to try and dig. The issue is that after a certain amount of digging, the hole fills with seawater and there is no way of stopping it. This has made it nearly impossible to dig anything good out, and 6 people have so far died trying to reach a treasure that may or may not even be down there. The Amber Room. The Amber Room is one of the few enduring mysteries of World War II. The Amber Room was considered the 8th wonder of the world and was a treasured Russian artifact. It was an actual room sculpted by the German artist Andreas Schluter in 1701. Amber was used to coat every last surface of the room, infused with honey and linseed. Then the wooden panels of the room were covered in gold or silver leaf and decorated with dazzling precious jewels. It was a truly monumental and valuable accomplishment. The room was a Russian treasure up until 1941, when Hitler's forces entered St. Petersburg, back then known as Leningrad. The Amber Room was disassembled, put in boxes, and never seen again. To this day, nobody has any idea what happened to it. Some say it was put on a train and brought to a secret cave in Poland, whose location has since been lost. Some say American soldiers found the room and stole the treasure, and still others say it was put on a U-boat that sank and is currently sitting at the bottom of the ocean.
Thanks for watching! Of course, there are plenty more historical mysteries, so let me know if you'd like a part 2. Be sure to subscribe for more, and I'll see you soon!
Until then, see you later.